Hi, my name's Larry Pollock, and welcome to the Light Foundry. Well, today I have with me an old friend I've known for a while who is not only a photographer, but an artist and works in many different mediums. And we've been talking on the phone over the years, and it seems to free flow. So I think we're just going to have no questions today sitting on my desk. We're just going to let it rock out here and see where it goes and talk about, I think, about art and that intersection with the digital world and see how we evolve from there. So, folks, welcome to Greg Beylerian in Los Angeles.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great. I know we met a long time ago. We were working on some website stuff and you needed some help and kind of flowed from there. And eventually I think I came down to LA and we hung out for a bit and we went out and did some
Yeah,
shooting. And
I think it's the first and only relationship that I've ever had that was born off the internet, which, which is completely normal by today's younger generation standards, but you're the one and only one for me.
and it's maintained because even if we don't talk for a couple of years, it's like we talked yesterday. It's just we just
Yeah.
start chattering. So yeah, so you've been doing this a long time, and both you and your wife are artists, and so that's got to be an interesting whole situation around the house with both of you depending on that.
Well, it's nothing short of what the dream feels like. It's freedom, and it's wonderful to have a partner who understands and is compatible with that kind of a vision of life, because it's not suitable for everyone, or maybe not everyone has the gumption to go on such a journey, which involves a lot of trust and courage.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so, yeah,
A lot of no short amount of faith in the fact that
yeah.
you'll keep busy and things and you being creative and that you won't run dry and stuff. So how long have you been creating in overall, not just photography but in art in general?
Well, it started when I was a child, very, very young, like it does for all kids. But for me, I found great joy in the experience. I have memories of what it felt like to create, and of course, and when I'm talking about going back to like 5, 6 years old, I was more three-dimensional, and there wasn't a digital age at that
Yeah.
time. I wasn't even working with cameras. It was just assembling and disassembling three-dimensional things. And it was my father who actually suggested that I photograph these things, because I was making them for him, mainly for his birthday, for Christmas, and for Father's Day. That was always the symbolic event for which I would build and create something. And mainly because when I would give him something, he would reply with a huge smile and a big hug. And he wasn't he was the old school kind of guy who wasn't very forward with his emotions. So I guess it was a way for me to get, affection from him. I noticed later in life as I kind of reflected on this, and that's what I was doing. And it's the photographs of those things that I made for him that became my portfolio, where I got into art, photography, and design school. So it's kind of an interesting arc. And then my life ultimately has been a journey since then on looking at life and society, and figuring out how I can live doing what I love most, which is being in the creative process.
Yeah. Well, I always see a lot of art behind you and stuff. So it arranges. I was just up on your website, which I'll put a link up later for everyone, and I'll show some other images along the way. But I've seen everything from sculpture to pen and ink to watercolors to, I think you have, you do live performance art, which people can see some of that on the website, where you're painting models, and a lot of course, photography using models with your own look, which kind of, the look spans across all of those different mediums. So I think that's what's interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I've never been bound by the medium or the genre. I have particular love affairs with cameras. I had my first camera when I was around 13, and I really explored it in college. And since then, as you know, because we've spent a lot of time on that, I put a lot of energy into learning how to master the tool technically. But for the most part, regardless of the tool or the medium, including digital technology, which I'm a huge fan of, and using it as an adhesive to merge traditional mediums, that's my fascination. Merging painting, drawing, sculptural dimensions with photography, sound, music. My whole thing is just to be true to my heart and follow my curiosity. And I never want to be that guy that had to make a choice. And of course, there was difficulty in figuring out how to live that way, because our American society was, very structurally oriented, and people have a hard time packaging themselves or understanding you. Even in photography terms alone, it's so common for people to go, I need to set up a portfolio that either emphasizes me as an advertising photographer, a wedding photographer, a product photographer.
Yeah,
And
right. Yeah.
So imagine when you just want to be free in a way and explore these things and live from it. How do you do that? That was a question I had to struggle with for a long time, which is mostly gone. It surfaces a little bit sometimes, but for the most part, that's no longer an issue for me.
No, I think that's what caught my attention. We were talking, I don't know, a month or so back, and we were talking about art, and I said, hey, we got to do this on video and things, because it was this process of letting go of all the trappings of society that's trying to hold you in and restrain you, and even your own stuff internally that wants to restrain you. Like I just said, I was talking to you before we started here. My starting my new project, it was like I was held back till a certain moment, and everything broke loose when I let go and quit worrying about it. And you're right. There are people who's they're very much, this is who they are and this is what they do, and that works for them. But I don't think I can quite hem myself in as far. I don't know if I'll go as wide range as you do, but
well, I think that's the core of it, as you just said, is to really focus on discovering who you are. And for example, my wife's brother is a cello maker, and
wow.
he gets incredible joy out of making cellos. When I see his cellos, I can't see a difference between one and the other. And I ask him, how is it you don't get bored of making the same thing over and over? And he goes, oh, it's so different each time. This style or that style, I can't see the difference. Even though I have a trained eye, it's so subtle to me even.
Yeah, exactly.
And he gets great joy out of that. And so I think it's really the treasure is to have the courage to follow your curiosity wherever it may go, and to live truth to that love affair.
Yeah.
That's been my approach, and I've used my life as an experiment to see because I asked myself this exact question 30 years ago when I got out of college, and I had to begin figuring out how to fend for myself. Could I live a life doing what I truly love in a society that I don't see many examples supporting this concept? So now 30 years down the road, I have a little insight of that. And I realized, oh my goodness, I was fortunate because I think it was the best choice I ever made.
Yeah, I think one of the things that does happen when you make a decision and you head yourself in a direction emotionally, mentally, and all together, they always, serendipitous things seem to happen. Like that wouldn't have happened when you're still holding yourself back. Someone asks you, hey, I'm looking for a mural on a wall, or can you help me with these kids with this art thing? And then you were approached by I believe the Armenian community there a number of years back, and you were able to travel and do the whole thing for them. So all those things wouldn't have happened if you hadn't committed. So that journey, how has that been, trying to find things to do? And besides just creating your own art, how do you, number one, get that out there so people know who you are, but how have you managed to incorporate that with other people coming to you with their own ideas?
Well, it's fascinating because I've never been a highly or marketing oriented person. And of course, 3/4 or the bulk of my life doing this was pre Instagram and social media. I started Instagram a few years ago, and that's pretty much the only social media I explore. And even doing that was a big effort for me. Before that, we didn't have anything like that. And the classic approach was, if you asked an entrepreneur, was make your 50 calls every day.
Right.
And I would hear everybody, because essentially if you want to live the life of a creative, you on some level have to embrace the same technique an entrepreneur will use, because he too doesn't have a boss and he has to figure out how to make things happen and how to manifest a vision. And it's a beautiful life if you have the courage, I guess. I mean, that's always been the biggest issue that I see with myself and my friends. It's the courage and the overcoming the insecurities. And that's even more central to this issue than where the opportunities are, which is essentially the question. Because what I discovered was, if I put myself in the position, the opportunities came. And that was me not being known as one of those kind of what's it called? A person like a child who's incredibly gifted. I wasn't that guy. So it's not like I had to work. I really had to work to develop my skills. For example, in photography, and it didn't come naturally. The love affair was there, and to be free was there, but to get the skills, lighting skills, that's not that you don't just pick up a camera and know how to make a woman look beautiful in the right light.
Yeah, I've been studying that for the last 8 years myself.
Yeah.
So,
and like, for example, just a quick, I don't want to go off the track too far, but like I remember working with a model who was paying me to do her headshot. And that's what, back in the day, you took gigs, you took whatever gigs you could get. Yeah. And I liked working with people. And I live in Los Angeles. So that was one of the avenues. You could make a couple $100. And I remember I got my, strobes. And I was still shooting on film in these days. And she came to see the results, with the loop. And we looked at the contact sheet. And she literally began to cry, not out of joy, okay? Because the way I had used the lights, the strobes, if you don't know how to use strobes, it's very easy to make someone not look good.
Yeah.
And it was a crushing moment for me, because she was consumed with her issue, which was, I'm not a beautiful person. That's now her insecurity, even though it's really, in great part, my fault, because I lit her poorly and accentuated things like, maybe some issues with her skin. I accentuated that with bad lighting. My issue now was, I don't want to be in this kind of situation ever again. It was traumatic. So I'm never doing it. That's my initial reaction. There's no way. I'm going to put myself in this kind of situation.
Let's run.
Right. Because so then I spent a few days thinking about it, and I said, wait a minute. I said to myself, Greg, you love photographing women. You love the female form. This can't be the outcome of such a situation. And then I was honest with myself. I says, okay, the problem is that you have to develop your skills. So that's what I did. And now fast forward, that was 20 years ago, maybe, or 25 years ago. Now, any woman who comes in front of my camera, and it doesn't matter who she is or what she looks like, how old she is, how big or small she is, it does not matter. I can make a beautiful photograph of her. Yeah. And that's the result of committing to the search to find beauty with, my process and the way I want to work. And that's the whole journey, is not giving in to the subtle insecurities and the fears that live under the skin, and that we sometimes blanket and call something else, because it's very hard for us to admit to what we're afraid of.
Yeah.
So we might, recognize it in something else. But I knew in my life's journey, my greatest aspiration was to live doing what I loved. And that is even quirky. That's not even saying just this kind of photography. I really am an explorer in a certain sense. And I want that freedom for myself. And I realized the only thing in my way is my insecurity. So if I can overcome that, so my whole journey became about observation of my own consciousness and finding my freedom there. And if I could unlock that, opportunities come as a result of that. That's what's so crazy about the whole situation.
Yeah, it is. It's one of the first things that I learned when I started photographing. And I did a lot of commercial photography, especially with products, but sometimes involved having to have models. And I had go on a set with a motorcycle, 2 top models, and I had the art director there, and I had to take myself for a moment and just say, you have to own this thing when you walk in here. You have to act like you know everything in the world, even though you haven't done 7. I had 7 studio lights, and I had 3 objects on a cyc wall. And then later on, we're going to take them out of that and put them in other backgrounds in Photoshop. So it was a big, big moment for me to just go, I can do this, and I have to walk in there as if I've done this every day of my life.
Yeah.
And insecurity, because you can't show that, and you have to be in there. You're directing things, you're moving around, and just being in the moment and making the calls. And I remembered just quickly, you reminded me, I got myself beat up by a thing when I was studying product photography. Some of the first things my mentor gave me, and I remember showing it we had a webinar with all these people from all over the world, and first thing he says, Larry, what the hell are you doing? Right in front of everybody, and then same thing, you want to pull back, you want to run,
Right.
So you say, how important is, what is my life about? And okay, I'm going to take my knocks, I'm going to go figure out how that doesn't happen to me again.
Yeah, exactly. And especially when you're a creative, it doesn't matter what the medium is, getting that understanding that, to listen to what people have to say, but don't cherish it either, because it's just an opinion. And there's always something to be learned. I like to be humble in that sense. I want to be very careful as I grow and continue to always be a beginner mind, so that I keep learning and growing, and also that I don't allow a form of arrogance to settle in. Oh, I've been shooting for 30 years. I know what I'm doing. I've seen that on sets, and I don't, it dampens the potential for seeing in a new way. So I'm very cautious to stay fresh and keep myself as humble as I can, and going into those kind of situations, letting someone, especially when you hang stuff on a wall, because I have friends who are great artists in whatever the mediums they are, and they don't show, mainly because they don't want to confront that aspect of it, which is the point when you're sharing your work and you're making yourself vulnerable to people's opinions and remarks. And you'll always have friends who will always pat you on the back and say a nice thing regardless,
right? Because
they're supportive. But then there are people who are going to tell you what they think, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's good too. But you have to be able to, I know people who they hear one bad thing and they will crumble.
Yeah.
It's like the model who cried in front of me. I mean, it doesn't get any worse than that.
No,
Really?
that was a very direct interpretation of what happened. You didn't have no words needed. And, I think you have to.
I in fact, emotionally destroyed her because of my work. That's a terrible situation to be in, but it's because of that circumstance that I've now I'm able to make, people only say the most when women come to describe their experience of how it was. It's a very beautiful time now to hear, because you're bringing you're showing them their beauty more than they were even able to realize in some way. So I'm helping people with their insecurities about how they feel about themselves, their own loving relationship, and their issues and complexities by showing them their beauty, because I don't retouch either with, all these techniques we can do with Photoshop and Lightroom. I don't manipulate the image in that way. So what they see of them is who they are.
Yeah.
It's not, it hasn't been corrected, belly tucks, things like that. I don't do anything like that.
Yeah.
And so it's wonderful to be able to help people see the beauty that exists in them, no matter their age or their size, and because it's deeper than that.
Have you seen the series that Leonard Nimoy did with the overweight women? Did an entire book of them all lit to you, and it's they're absolutely gorgeous. So
I have to see that. I know he makes pictures, but I'm not familiar with this. I'm going to look for that. Actually,
yeah, I always wanted to order a book before he passed away, but he definitely did some wonderful stuff. So I just was wondering if you'd seen it. You're talking about making the body form beautiful, no matter what size, shape, age, anything. I do manipulation because of the advertising stuff, but there has been a move toward more of not having to select the slimmest model, not having them super airbrush and Photoshop, and getting that more real thing. I think where I first started seeing some of it was in like magazine, What Cowboys in India. So I'd say middle-aged models they're still done up well, but they were not your young 21-5-year-olds.
Well, the figurative form is the most dominant reoccurring theme in my work. And sometimes I've wondered why that is. And then memories came back to me that when I was very young, going back to 5, 6, 7, way before puberty, I just, being a curious child, I discovered in my dad's closet that he had a comprehensive collection of Playboy magazines, like a stack up high.
Oh boy, now, you had all the issues.
Well, the reason why I looked for it is because at that time, I subscribed to Ranger Rick magazine. Maybe you remember that. It was for kids about nature, and it always came wrapped in brown paper. And my mom got the mail once and saw the brown wrap magazine. I says, "Oh, my Ranger Rick." So she hands it to me without thinking, and I open it, and it was the most beautiful Ranger Rick I had ever seen. It was a beautiful nude of a woman standing under a waterfall. So I thought it was Ranger Rick because it was nature, but not realizing it was a Playboy. And then I saw, so my mom quickly takes it from me, but then I knew, I got, Ranger Rick subscription. My dad got the other magazine.
Yes.
So I found it, and I spent years studying them. I would take like 5 at a time secretly, and I would sneak them to my room, and I just studied them. And this was from the early 70s, I guess, when the photography was natural.
Yeah.
Before there was even implants or breast jobs, and the photography was natural lighting. Usually, it's a different look than the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
And that was my, that I saw the beauty of the human form from that, and that was like I was saying before puberty. So it wasn't a sexual thing either. It was just a love for the form, and it never left me. And in my studio, in my whole house, all around, 3/4 probably of the work are figurative.
Yes, that's one of the things I noticed at first, and that you're one of the things I first watched, other than your abstracts. Like I have one you gave me years ago for some trade we did, and you had a video where you're actually painting a live nude as performance art with an audience, and then when you're done, you photograph them as well. And I don't know if you're still doing that, but for a while you were doing that as an expression of things, and it was quite interesting to see the result. And you see that today in some of your work, but you work out of your own studio. So.
Yeah, well, I was born and raised in New York City. My dad collected contemporary art. I keep referring to him. Obviously, he's been an influence in many ways. I'm more than I'm even realizing. He keeps coming up. He collected art. So I learned about, great photographers from him, and then, great artists, because he collected this stuff. And so I'm looking at, Helmut Newton. Then I'm looking at Christo and Mapplethorpe's. And, Christo was this guy who made these temporary installations. And then and the work was the photograph or the collage he made.
Right.
And so of course, then there's, Basquiat and Keith Haring and Andy Warhol. These are all the guys I grew up with in New York City when I was a kid. So when I look at my life today, I'm like, oh, I'm fusing all these things. And so I built a studio little by little over time to accommodate the way I like to work. And the way I'm currently working is, yes, a model will come to the studio. It's designed to handle water, paint. I can be as wild and messy as I want. And essentially what I do is using music and nurturing the ambience in a certain way that I've come developed to do. The whole process is about letting go and being present, really returning to a play state. In fact, all my work is that way. Even if I'm being commissioned to do an ad campaign for a jockey, for example, like I've done, which was pure photographic advertising, I'm still integrating my aesthetics, my workflow, how to get the model to bring the essence of the moment forward and how to capture that shot. It's always the same technique, which actually comes from my training in Kung Fu martial arts, which was essentially a meditative state by a Buddhist master, just focusing on being present and staying in a lucid state and learning to respond from that intuitive voice. Yeah. And so, models will often say to me, okay, what's the idea today? What's the theme? Which of course is implying a projection into the future of what we're going to do. And my biggest gripe is contrived work. And, I'm not interested in reiterating what I've already done. My interest is to break through. I want to contribute creatively to my community, and I want to push forward. So I can't just return to what's already been done. And that's a safety feature, as you know, right? We'll do that as a safety protocol because we want to get a good shot. So you might be inclined to do the setup that worked great the last time. Right. But at the same time, I want a new look. So I have to implement, and that's what I do. I implement that freedom of spontaneity. And that also is very helpful because the models come. And some models, they're coming, they're going to give you the same 20 poses that they're used to doing. Like you're doing a Sears and Roebuck catalog shoot. Not realizing, we all want to break through. They want to creatively break through. And the best way that I've done it is by encouraging spontaneity. And so the experience is like I'm merging my painting. I've got my brushes. I've got my camera gear. I've got my lighting set up. I've got materials. It could be other materials. And I'm building a three-dimensional, because I started three-dimensionally as I was a kid. Now I'm returning to the three-dimensional space because it's a living, breathing, three-dimensional, human. And then the process is capturing. If then it becomes photographic after I've made something, we capture that, and then we transform it using water, using other materials. I photograph that evolution, and it can last, the whole process lasts about 3 hours.
Yeah. That's really
And then, of course, and so it's a fusion of different elements of experience from sculpture and painting. But the whole thing's photographed, and then she's washed off in showers. So the artwork is gone. But it's like Christo in that the finished piece is the captured documentation of it. And that's where good quality photographic skills are necessary.
Yeah, exactly. You do need that. So you definitely, you've moved through a lot of different gear over the years and things you've shot, just about all the major brands, I think. I think currently you're using Sony just because I think it's light, it's small, kind of like I've moved away from the larger gear. That probably helps as well, just having this smaller piece, and every one of them you have to get used to so they become unconscious competent, if you will. You just use it so it's not in your way to create.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, it always has to be the system that works for you. And I know camera lovers and photographers, we often think that, the best new gear is going to help us.
Right.
And that can be an entrapment, really. because I know a lot of friends who have bought fancy gear and it doesn't change anything when
No.
it's in your hand.
No.
The reality is it just won't change anything. So finally, I couldn't always afford what I thought I wanted. So I grabbed what I could afford. And I started, on Canon when I was a kid. Then my teen years up through college, I was on Nikon. Then sometime in my mid-20s, I shifted back, or late 20s, I shifted back to Canon. Went hardcore deep in Canon, just went deep into the best prime lenses, the fastest primes they had. That was the phase I was in. We were talking a lot during that phase.
I had one of those too, and you told me it'd take me a year to learn to use that 51
Right.
f1.2, and it did.
Right. That's right. It was my setup was a 14-2.8, the 35-1.4, 51-2, 85-1.2, which I still kept. I sold all the other stuff. I kept that with the adapter just because of the bokeh beauty, uniqueness of it that I implement with the Sony. And then I had the 100 macro. That was my setup. I got rid of all my zooms for my own personal aesthetic, for low light. For a few years, I went into the wedding exploration with my friend.
Right.
And can you imagine? That was me exploring different genres of photography. And of course, you're always getting better.
Yeah, well, that's what I've done. Yeah, I've explored. I've shot so many different almost everything except babies and pets,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I've shot both of those too. And then what really happened to me was you mentioned it earlier. I was commissioned by the Archdiocese of the Armenian community. It's like, the headquarters of the spiritual headquarters of Armenian people on the West Coast. There was a 100-year anniversary of the Armenian genocide, a heavy centennial moment, and they wanted some kind of reflective installation of this. And they reached out to a few different people, and that's what I ended up being commissioned to do. And that involved me going to Armenia and Turkey you can say, the ancestral origins of Armenian people, which used to be called Western Armenia, and also what some say the scene of the crime. I partly got this because I was more neutral. I wasn't emotionally encapsulated in it as other Armenians were, because I was born in New York City. So I was a little bit of an outsider. Yeah. Anyways, but I went to Armenia with all my gear, all that Canyon gear I told you about.
Yeah.
And when you're traveling these countries, you can't leave your gear in the hotel room.
No.
Your project's over if you lose your gear, if it gets stolen or something. So I had to carry around all my gear. If I'm going out to dinner, lunch, breakfast, it was always with me. On the last day, I threw out my shoulder because it was so heavy. And I was just tired of carrying it around. So I was like, maybe I have to buy 2 systems, one for traveling projects and one for studio work.
Yeah.
And, I went to the local camera store, which is Sammy's. And now mirrorless was starting to happen. The Fujis had some cool stuff. Sony had their first A7 out.
Yeah.
And I go up to the counter, and my partner and I, that I do a lot of photographic work with, we always go to Sammy's to play with the gear.
Yeah.
And we would, walk, and we're going there to go look at the Fuji, the Fuji 2/3 systems. And the Sony rep was there. It's so funny. And we're walking by the Sony counter where the rep is to go to the Fuji. And he goes, "Yeah, headed to see mirrorless?" And we say, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, if you want to see the best stuff, you got to stop here."
Of course he is.
So we laugh. We go, that's partly arrogant and funny at the same time. Show me. So we say, "Show us why you think it's better." And he pulled out the A7, and we were like, this is curious. We'd come back, we'd do some tests. We'd come back again. They would let us. We'd bring CF cards. We'd spend a few hours shooting stuff in there, making comparisons, looking at lenses, looking at the gear. Long story short, I bought an A7S.
Yeah, which is a great camera. It's 12 megapixels.
Right.
It's only 12, but it captures light like nobody's business.
Exactly. For 1 year, I rode the two systems side by side because I thought I would spend the rest of my life and be buried with my Canon system. I
Yeah.
loved it so much. I could say maybe I didn't see, well, anyways, I'm not going to get caught into the details because we'll be here all day.
Right.
But the point is, after a year of shooting on the Sony system, I was ready to let go of the Canon gear. And so that's what I did. I sold everything but that 85-1.2, got a MetaBones adapter back then, or was included actually, because I bought my next round at B&H. They included the MetaBones, and I've been on a Sony system ever since. And I do upgrade every time there's a new one. And now I've gone from the S, because now I'm 95% shooting only in my studio, which is very unusual because I loved environmental shooting. I never thought this day would come. And ironically, that's how it's been for the last 4 years, with the exception here and there of a commission.
Remember,
certain special situations.
Yeah, when I was out there, you showed me that spot you were going to turn into it, and that's now become the place. So
yeah, it's become that place. And so now so therefore I'm high resolution. I'm gallery, large format printing. That's my reality. So even at the expense of a little low light, because I'm not in that situation anymore, it's all about giving me the largest, biggest, most detailed prints I can possibly have, while still being able to have the speed and dexterity of a Ferrari, in a way of shooting, and up, down, list, route, because that's how I like to shoot. I'm a fast shooter. I was always that way, even during film days. I shot tons of rolls of film. I was irrational that way because I was spontaneous. Anyways, so I'm on the A7R4 now.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm heavily in love. But I do have friends who ask me my opinion. I tell them about my experience with the Sony. They come over from Nikon or Canon, and they're like, "Yeah, I'm going back."
Yeah. Well, so, it is. I shoot the Fuji now, and I've been shooting the Fuji for a little over a year now. The XG3, the XG4 just came out, and the 4 is what I'm going to add. So I have 2 bodies, and I'm going to let go of my Canon gear finally. It took me a year as well. So yeah, it's a process. Well, we've already talked a long time here, so I think we're going to probably have to do more of these along the way. But I'm just trying to think of a good way to wrap this up about instead of being caught up in gear, maybe just drop back into this reality of how do you become an artist and committing to it and finding work. I think that's just something you just can't pre-plan. You dive in, and these things begin to happen when you begin the process of focusing your energy there and talking to people. And yeah, it doesn't hurt to go out and make a lot of phone calls and introduce yourself and go and network. I mean, I get myself out there as much as possible, but and do all kinds of strange shoots, but it works and stuff. So.
Well, my grandma said to me when I was young, and I never forgot it. She said it in French, "Qui cherche trouve," and it means "he who seeks shall find." And that's been my approach, meaning I made the commitment because I knew I wanted to live a creative life. That was the journey. And all it was making the commitment to that journey. And not once have I fallen without a roof over my head. And in fact, beautiful opportunity comes. And you can never understand what those opportunities will be unless you are immersing yourself in the process and exploring that. And the vibration, as esoteric as that may sound, the energy of the commitment and the devotion, it resonates in a certain way. And then you become known for that. And that's by not doing, and that's by doing very little in the social media. If you then incorporate any practical 101 entrepreneurial process that there's 1,000 YouTubes on, and you include that into it, which we didn't have growing up. I never did any of that, and I still survived. And by the way, when I say survived, I mean flourished, because I was doing what I loved. Yeah. And all my friends or just people I know who didn't take that approach and are now in their 50s or whatever, and they picked just the financial rewards, there's other issues, and that are greater, because you can, if you're not doing what you love, boy, the depression from that is heavy.
Oh yeah.
And dollars don't solve that problem.
No, I agree.
People think they can, but they don't. And so for me, I was willing to make sacrifices financially, and I did. In my life, my wife joined me, and we always had a great time. Life never sucked, even if we were poor and we're scraping quarters. I remember many times we were in those situations, but life was awesome because we were doing what we loved. And it's even more awesome now because you have social media. It's so easy. People are finding you all over the world, and I don't know. I think it's just, make the commitment, have the courage if you want it. It's just that, know, and the rest will follow.
That was for my point in life, and a bit of my story, and so it's kind of reached that place where what I want to do. I'm 66 this year, and I'm like, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? Do I want to do it for the money, or do I want to do it for the passion in the creativity? And that's really what it came down to. So you did it earlier than I did. I started there, and then I fell out of it, and now I'm back. So
you've had a very colorful life. So, and it's never too late. That's the beautiful thing,
exactly. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, this has been fantastic. I mean, this could go on in lots of different directions. I'm sure we'll get back and we'll dig into some other areas maybe later on, but I don't want this thing to go so long that we're coming up on about 45 minutes here.
That's good. It's been great.
We always have great talks, and I think my phone always says at least an hour and a half on it that we've been on.
Yeah. Yeah. Because this is the where the meat of life is. It's in this juicy stuff here.
It is.
Well,
I'm certainly going to get out your way again one of these days, not too distant future, and catch up with you some more and see that studio that I saw the ground before. You were just breaking ground on it.
Oh, it's a fun spot. I can't wait to see you and have you out here. Right. We'll shoot something together.
Well, thank you so much for being here on the Light Foundry today. We're going to do something again, I'm sure, this year, and talk again maybe a couple more times and just keep the conversation going.
Sure.
And that's great.
That'd be lovely.
Yeah. Thanks a lot there. Hey, we'll talk with you.
Thank you. Okay.